So with the Fed cutting rates, JP Morgan and other big analysts are expecting a market dump before the actual reversal back to the upside. And there's a couple scenarios here from Ted Pillows here on Twitter. And if he's wrong, he better tuck himself in for a nap, because both of these situations show the chart going down before bouncing back to the upside. One of which going down to $104,000, another which to $92,000. And so ultimately we'll see, take everything with a grain of salt and only pay attention to the data that I'm going to share with you in this video. That's how we form our opinions. So here's some data that's documented, because lots of people are saying that the Federal Reserve is going to implement XRP, whether it be directly or indirectly. Well, this document shows Ripple gaining indirect access to the Federal Reserve infrastructure via FIS integration as a third-party token service provider and through SWIFT. Where if we zoom in here, we can see typically consumers or small businesses or even corporate companies go to financial institutions to be able to transact through third-party service providers. And these are intermediary banks, these are Nostro Vostro accounts, you name it, for real-time payment schemes, ultimately to go through other banks or credit unions to then pay out different consumers, small businesses, or corporate companies. And so the challenge here with the banking system has been all of these intermediaries that are part of the real-time payment schemes to make these payments possible. And that's what's created a bottleneck within the financial system that takes 3 to 5 days to send a wire transfer. And so the future of this is going to be third-party token service providers working with these massive banks and financial institutions. And so obviously the biggest companies in the world aren't going to reveal their playbook and their plans and make it that easy for the general public to understand. This is where we're seeing Ripple come in as a third-party token service provider. And so, for example, you're not seeing it as the main cryptocurrency that the Federal Reserve is using, but it's more so, as Arthur Brito quoted in 2013, XRP will be the hidden plumbing of the financial system. And he expects the majority of people who use the Ripple payment network to be able to ignore XRP, because payments in the Ripple network can be bridged through other currencies beside XRP, and it's completely optional for payments to bridge through XRP. Generally, payments will only bridge through XRP if people find it more efficient or otherwise desirable to do so. And at the time a payment is bridged through XRP, the value of XRP is less important than the spread, because transactions occur automatically, and the spread is what is captured as profit by the market makers on each side of the XRP trade. So the Ripple network combines a currency market with a payment network. This encourages the instant settlement of cross-currency payments versus netting. For market makers to make a profit providing liquidity, they must beat all other competing market makers with the best rate. So this should give excellent rates for the counterparties of a payment. And what's interesting here is a few months ago, July 14th, 2025, the Fed made a transition adopting the ISO 222 messaging format, basically getting rid of their old Fedwire application interface format. Now here's what's really crazy. In May of 2020, Ripple became the first distributed ledger technology focused organization to join the ISO 222 Registration Management Group, which is a key governing body to maintain the development of the standard. And this move positioned Ripple to contribute directly to the standard's ongoing refinement, particularly in areas like cross-border payments and interoperability with emerging technologies. So basically, Ripple is the company that's influencing this entire standard here to standardize API connections for legacy systems like SWIFT with modern networks, which is basically going to facilitate broader adoption of solutions like RippleNet for high-value real-time payments. Now, what if the Trojan horse here for institutional adoption is, Bitcoin ETFs, whereas inside the horse is really XRP for the banks? Because right here, even Arthur Brito said it himself, generally payments will only bridge through XRP if people find it more efficient or otherwise desirable to do so. Now, as a company here, and you're approaching banks and the whole industry that you're involved in has no regulatory clarity, do you think the smartest move is to reveal your secret weapon right away, something that they don't even think has regulatory clarity, and that is going through a lawsuit with the SEC? Of course not. That would be the stupidest move you could possibly make as a business owner. The goal that you would want to demonstrate to these banks and these financial institutions is very simple, and that's a proof of concept. Basically, showing the banks that they could integrate your technology with frictionless compatibility with their already usable existing infrastructure. Now, if you complicate the mix by saying, now we're going to make you use XRP and you have to use XRP right out the gate, can you see how they might stonewall and say no because there's no clarity there? Of course, it makes common sense. So with Ripple having a seat at the table, so to speak, they've been advocating for seamless features that enable integration between blockchain-based assets and the global financial systems. So the XRP currency is not inherently ISO 222 compliant, as the standard pertains to messaging protocols rather than individual cryptocurrencies. The key here for XRP's use case is to unlock trillions of dollars in trapped liquidity in Nostro and Vostro accounts. Now, I thought this was an interesting document here from the SEC.gov, basically showing a proposal to make XRP a strategic financial asset for the US and these plans to unlock trillions through XRP. This is crazy. Showing that global Nostro accounts account for $27 trillion. The US share of Nostro accounts is around $5 trillion. Capital released using XRP is just 30%, $1.5 trillion. Annual savings on transaction fees, 0.5% would be $7.5 billion in savings. So the key economic benefits here would be 1.5 trillion freed from banking liquidity, 7.5 billion in annual transaction cost savings, and the ability to establish a national Bitcoin reserve at the same time. And so number 2 would be addressing the SEC and Department of Justice conflicts. So the action would be to classify XRP as a payment network, not a security, and the recommendation would be official clarification and settlement with Ripple. That's happened. The next would be the removal of Department of Justice restrictions on banks, and this would create legal clearance for XRP-based transactions. That's currently happening. Because listen to what Jerome Powell said right here.
Banks get to decide who their customers are. That's not our decision. And so banks are free to provide banking services to the crypto industry, to crypto companies. And banks are also free to conduct crypto activities as long as they do so in a way that is
compliant, is what he was going to say there, basically. But look at his body language. He is being forced into submission here. The game is already over. The next action would be to mandate XRP for bank liquidity solutions. And this is the Federal Reserve OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the recommendation, direct integration into financial policy. Now, what did we see Donald Trump post a little while ago? Well, he said a U.S. crypto reserve will elevate this critical industry after years of corrupt attacks by the Biden administration, which is why he signed an executive order on digital assets to move forward on a strategic crypto reserve, including what currencies? Well, look at the first one that he listed here, XRP. Then he put Solana and ADA. Why would he list XRP first? I think you already know the answer to that. Now, number 3, a standard 24-month implementation plan. So the phase, regulatory clearance. This has been the most important thing. It's like the broccoli of the industry. No one wants to eat that word. Regulation, right? Everyone just wants things to go up. Money go up, right? You buy a coin, you make money. But the reality is the time frame that it takes for this to take place. The SEC settlement had to come first, then the Department of Justice legal clearance. So a little background on the Department of Justice. They investigated Ripple Labs for operating an unregistered money service business under the Bank Secrecy Act while selling XRP. So Ripple actually agreed to a settlement that included $450,000 to the Department of Justice and $700,000 civil penalty to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This required Ripple to register as an MSB and implement compliance measures. This was not clearance, but a resolution of alleged violations, affirming XRP's treatment as a virtual currency subject to anti-money laundering rules. And the ongoing stance under recent administration with now Trump in office has shifted towards de-emphasizing cryptocurrency enforcements against platforms and developers. And as of April, the Department of Justice announced it would end broad investigations into crypto platforms focusing only on criminal uses. Example would be like cartels, right? While avoiding actions against the underlying technologies. And the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network classifies XRP as a convertible virtual currency, but is not regulated as a legal tender like the US dollar. Other agencies like the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, have allowed banks to custody XRP since 2020. The next phase would be an XRP government payment pilot, and this is like 6 to 12 months. So key actions would be things like IRS tax refunds, Social Security integration. After that would be bank adoption of XRP for Nostro replacement, 12 to 24 months. That's full-scale financial integration. And then the other phase on this says Bitcoin reserve buildup. That's just gradual over 2 years using released capital. Now, step number 4 would be an accelerated 6 to 12-month plan, fast-tracking XRP implementation if everything goes according to plan. The first phase is obviously regulatory clearance. This would be accelerated through presidential executive orders. We're seeing that with Donald Trump. Then XRP testing and government payments. This would be accelerated through a Treasury-backed pilot program. And the standard timeline would be 6 to 12 months. If this is accelerated, 2 to 4 months. Then we see full-scale financial integration. This is Federal Reserve and OCC mandates. So if this goes as fast as possible, that's basically 10 months on the lower time frame, and then 16 months on the end of the accelerated timeline. But obviously there's no way for me to predict exactly when this is going to happen because these are rough estimates. However, these are the necessary actions needed to accelerate XRP integration. Now, if you haven't heard what David Andolfato said here, who is an economist in the research division at the Federal Reserve, listen to this clip right here.
People say, how can you trust, the Fed to do the bookkeeping? I mean, like I say, my response is, well, you don't expect the Fed to kind of steal your money. I mean, if the Fed can print all the money at once, it's not going to like mess around with your bookkeeping. So, we have this big spreadsheet, the blockchain if you want, but it's just managed by the Fed. And it's very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin.
It is very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin.
But they could delegate the clearing of these payments to some third party, some sort of Ripple-like protocol.
So delegating the responsibility to a third party like Ripple that is much cheaper than Bitcoin, if he's saying that, and he was the senior vice president in the research division of the Federal Reserve Bank, where he served as the senior policy advisor for James Bulliard, CEO and president of the bank, well, maybe he knows something that we don't know. Check this out. Is Ripple giving XRP in the escrow to the Fed or some other massive global power player like the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements? Well, here's the thing to understand. Ripple posted this on their website and actually covered this back in August. This video right here got 97,000 views because a lot of people caught on to this same one-liner right here. It says, by securing the lion's share of XRP in escrow, people can now mathematically verify the maximum supply that can enter the market. While Ripple has proved to be a responsible steward of XRP supply for almost 5 years, the lockup eliminates any concerns that Ripple could flood the market, which they've pointed out before as a scenario that would be bad for Ripple. Now, the key to understand here is the word that they use, steward of XRP supply. And a verb of this means manage or look after another's property. So everybody knows that Ripple didn't create XRP. Ripple was given XRP, and they were the steward of XRP. But the real question is, for who? And so this is why a lot of people are saying things in the comments of this video like Ripple are just agents or an arm of the government. Just like Bitcoin was created by the government, it's all smoke and mirrors. Bitcoin was the cookie for the world. So this plan has been set in motion for years. In plugging XRP in as the secret plumbing behind the scenes that the vast majority of people in the world will, number one, never even know. And number two, they won't even understand even if they tried because it's pretty complicated.